Ladies and gentlemen, this is Kim Greenhouse. I want to welcome you to It's Rainmaking Time. We've done many segments on weather and climate, and one of the concerns that I've had for many years has been the rise in sea level. This was the image in my mind. This is what I read in Al Gore's book and in the movie An Inconvenient Truth that scared me the most. And because it scared me the most, it's actually been one of the last aspects of climate change that I've been willing to look at. And we're here, we're looking at it, and I have read about and contacted Nils-Axel Mörner, who has his background in geology. He was head of the unit of paleogeophysics and geodynamics at Stockholm University. He's organized 2 major international conferences, one on Earth rheology, isostasy, and eustasy. In 1977, he has been the president of the INQUA Commission on Sea Level Changes and Coastal Evolution. He also headed the INTES project on geomagnetism and climate. He has really been kind of the main point person in the world on everything related to sea level and the sea. In 2008, he was awarded the Golden Chondrite of Merit from University of Algarve at an international sea level meeting in Portugal for his irreverence and contribution to our understanding of sea level change. For those of us who have really accepted the information that the sea level is rising, what he's about to share with us today will definitely stupefy you. For others, it'll calm you. For others, it will mystify you as to why someone who spent his life on this is telling us the direct opposite of everything the IPCC, Al Gore, the supposed people who understand this matter. We will have a major change of heart. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nils-Axel Mörner to It's Rainmaking Time. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this very nice and correct introduction.
I want you to share with us, firstly, how it is in your field that you have measured sea levels and their changes so that we have a frame of reference for audiences about where you're coming from and how this is traditionally done.
Yes. May I just say something from the beginning? In the beginning of the 1990s, the IPCC started off, and I think it headed almost immediately in the wrong direction, just to prove that the anthropogenic effect had set the changes we are measuring. So in 1991, I was invited to Washington at the American Association of Advancement of Science to talk about sea level changes. And I said that sea level is not rising, because that was the evidence from the field. And the IPCC people, and especially the President Bolin, was very angry about this. But it couldn't be helped. I continued with my writing, scientific papers. But in 1999, there was a big IPCC review, and they asked me to be the expert reviewer. And I was so, and I was very surprised. First, to see the very low quality of that chapter on sea level. Secondly, even more surprised I was because it was written by 33 authors, but not a single one was a sea level specialist. They were taken from other disciplines because they were loyal. And of course, that upset me very much. At exactly that moment, I had become president of the INQUA Commission on Sea Level Changes and Coastal Evolution. We had about 300-400 of the top sea level specialists in the world. So I took it to our commission. Please, have your opinion. Let us go through this. What should we, as sea level specialists, say, contrary to what IPCC say? So we had it up at 5 international meetings. We had it up in our networking and our homepage. And we came to a conclusion that in 100 years I mean, it's in 2100. Maybe sea level could at the most rise, and listen, 10 centimeters.
And what does that mean?
Stories of 10 centimeters. 10 centimeters plus and minus. That is just nothing.
Well, what is 10 centimeters?
And later we have even updated it, because in a very short while, or in 30 years or so, we will be in a solar minimum and it will be cold again. So then sea level may go a little down. So we say 5 centimeters plus and minus 15. So that is nothing to worry about. And that's the beginning. At the same time, but you shouldn't just say things. You must go out in the field and prove it. And this is typical for sea level people, or geologists instead of meteorologists. Meteorologists sit at computers, and we are in the field. So we started international field study on sea level change in the Maldives, because all people said Maldives will be gone, wiped out from the surface of the earth, or surface of the water, as a matter of fact, because sea is rising, and in 50 or 100 meters, they said, they domed it had to be flooded. So we started to work there, and very soon we saw that no, for heaven's sake, there is no trend here. Sea is not changing in any way. I mean, we worked in the attacked coast, in the lee sides of the coast, in lagoons, in lakes, in offshore cores, all kind of environments. And wherever we worked, we got the same answer. No problems. So, and then I published this. And I have continued the work. And I launched a little booklet with what I say with a modest title, The Greatest Lie Ever Told, because there, with observational facts, I wanted to show that what the others are claiming is simply not correct.
Can you explain to us, in your field, how is the sea change measured traditionally? What do you do when you're in the field, when you're measuring if the sea is rising or not?
Okay. There are different ways of doing it. One way is putting in what is called a tide gauge. It's really a measuring rod usually at the port. But remember, usually that gauge is sitting on a very heavy harbor construction of concrete. So very, very often it doesn't show any rise of sea level or so. It shows also the compaction of the sediment underneath the big concrete mass. So we can get some direction, but it's not straightforward. The other is nowadays satellite altimetry, which is a wonderful tool because it measures even the middle of the oceans. The thing is that you have to calibrate it in a correct way, and you should certainly not add personal calibration in order to make it fit your expectations. And that's what people have done. What we are doing as geologists, we go to the actual coast and we look at the morphology. I mean, what happens there with the waves and the long term. Then we look at the stratigraphy. We cut, please, and see how the sediments are being deposited. For example, is it erosion? Most people say if the coast is eroding, they say, sea is rising. Very seldom this is the case. Much more common it is that the sea level lowering causes heavy erosion. And the material being put in mobility, you go to the lee side, and there you see if it's put attacking the former coast or if it's putting at a lower terrace. And then it's a long term. You can measure it within centimeters, even better. So it's a very sharp thing. And lagoons are perfect because lagoons are not affected by the waves. So you compare that. And you look at, for example, in Maldives, you have the corals. The corals cannot grow if sea level is not rising. So instead of growing upwards, they grow laterally. That's a very good indicator. And you go into lakes. If a sea is going up, usually a lake is becoming flooded. From, for example, there could be a peat surface, and the peat goes to lake, and if its sea is going down, on the contrary, the lake dries out. And all those things we put together. And in the Maldives, you can be pretty sure that sea is not rising. Then you are listening, of course, to what the seamen are saying. They say different routes for the trafficking with boats, if it was blocked or if it's being flooded and so on. So you use that information too. But you don't sit at home comfortably in a chair and having your computer in front of you, loading up tide gauge records and drawing straight lines of trends, because you have to have a very long cover. We have cycles, and cycles are going up and down. So each cycle must be completed, preferably several times. The longest cycle, the tidal cycle, is 18.6 years. So we should have 30, 40, 50 years record in order to be on the safe side. That's about the differences.
You did many projects, though. What you're doing in the Maldives is one of them. You're doing something in Bangladesh as well. Can you speak about that? Because that's of great concern.
I will want to say something about two other places, which I have in my booklet. I have not been there. But, for example, in Tuvalu, the president Tuvalu said, we are being flooded. But look at their own tide gauge. It is 32 years record, and there is absolutely no trend of a rising surface. It's completely flat. So how could they say so? Vanuatu is a Pacific island. They said that they were the first sea level rising refugees. But again, there we have from 92, so it's not that long, but it's 18 years record. And again, there's no trend in it. If it's stable, I mean, the tide gauge records, sometimes they are, as I said before, they are due to compaction. They over-exaggerate the rise. But if they are stable, they are stable. And this is the case of those two very, very critical places. Then I was just this October 2009, I was in Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is it has a huge delta area. And delta area, because of the loading of the sediments, it's usually often subsiding. But now it was important to trace, is there any global sea level rise component in the delta material? Because, of course, that could superimposed on the other factors. It could be threaten the low-lying areas of Bangladesh. And some people have been claiming that 1/4 will be gone in 100 years, or somebody said even 90%, and some people said that 5 million of people will be flying away from the coast, being sea level refugees. And so it's very important not just to sit and talk, to observe. So I went there and I got first fantastic records. And it's now all written up, and it is I have sent in the paper, as the scientists are doing, and it's being peer-reviewed, and hopefully I get it accepted, and then we will see it. However, what we saw, what is very, very strong and severe erosion of the coast. Erosion, remember, most people would say, sea is rising. But when you looked at the details, that's why geological eye come in. You could see that the mangrove trees, the roots of them, you could see exactly where it was spreading out. So I could exactly tie in the previous mud flat surface. And it had not changed. It had not changed. So it was a huge erosion, but absolutely zero sea level rise. And when one looked very, very, very carefully, it was even so that the sand particles in the clay had been washed together, and they formed a little, what we call high tide beach. And that high tide beach was about 10, 20 centimeter lower than the delta surface. So as a matter of fact, if anything has changed in the last 100 years, it's a little small lowering, exactly as we saw in the Maldives, but no ongoing rise. And that changes all the concept what the other are talking about.
This is a totally different context of observation.
Exactly. They are seeing that, they say something, thermal expansion. It means that if you heat up a railway rod, it becomes longer, and therefore you have about 1 centimeter between each segment in a railroad. And the same goes, of course, for the water. If it's heated up, it becomes expanding. But it's a very, very small place. Usually it's just at the surface. But if you are in the middle of the ocean and you heat up the ocean very much, maybe the uppermost 300 meter get heated up. If you heat it up 2 degrees, the actual rise is 10 centimeters. So it's not very much. But at the coast, there is zero water to expand. So at the coast, there is zero. And some people think with flood into the coast but that is wrong. It's completely wrong, because the dynamics of the ocean surface it's highly irregular water surface because of these dynamic things. But that's another thing which is a bit complicated. But doesn't flow into the coast. This is wrong.
So it's kind of like erosion is also a player in the phenomenon of the sea status change.
Yeah.
But it's not for the reasons we think or have been told or have internalized as facts.
Precisely. You think of when you go out swimming on a very nice sandy coast. The waves are taking the water out and in, and off the shore. It has become what scientists call an equilibrium profile of the grains. They are going back, but really not moving very much. So if sea is rising, yes, it becomes a little attack. Of course it does. But if sea is lowering, all this equilibrium profile has to be redone, and therefore it becomes much more of erosion that is lowering than a rise. So it's a very simple thing, but it's still problematic for those not working with it. And this is the case for us in the sea level community. For us, it's no problem, and therefore we gave this small problem. But those who were writing up the IPCC report, they were not sea level specialists. They were meteorologists and so on. And they were only interested in getting trends for computer games. And then there was some other which like Al Gore, what did he say? He said that the whole of the Arctic will melt in a few years. This is physical, absolutely impossible. It's not even close to it. So most of us, having passed school time, we had some experiments in physics. We had to get ice cube, and you try to melt it in room temperature, measure the time, and then you could see the calorimetric equation. And the same goes here. We cannot upset physics. And what these guys are doing, they are upsetting physics. So this is really very important. And if you go to the enormous melting after the last ice age, we have so fantastic quantities of ice all the way down to New York and all the one down the way to Hamburg in Europe. And that melted in Sweden, in Stockholm. It melted by 200-300 meters. The ice front moved back per year. Still, sea level didn't rise more than 1 meter per century. So any persons claiming anything more than 1 meter, they just don't know history. And that's what we have to piece together, We shouldn't just be loudspeakers. You must have sense and knowledge and never give up studying. Okay?
How do you conduct your work now? Because the piece that you're articulating, the context and the perspective that you're bringing to the understanding of this from your many years of experience at the high levels, how are you doing your work today? How do you get funding? How do you proceed?
That's usually because I'm retired. Up to retirement, I always had some funding. I was at the Swedish National Research Council, having a personal position there. And nowadays, after retirement, I have no funding. I have absolutely zero, and that makes some problem. But because I am very frequently invited to, then I use the invitation, and then I stick out into the field and do some work too. But yes, that's a problem. But I try to overcome it in different ways. Then sometimes I give lectures and I get some extra money, and then I use it for the field studies.
Is it true that if you're in research and you're a scientist, that you really have to have large funding in order to do the proper work that you're doing? And if you don't have it, basically you're out of doing your life's work.
No, I don't think so, because I used to say when I was quarreling with people here in Sweden that those who have the money, they have no ideas. And those who have the ideas usually have no money, or at least they have too little, because they are problematic things because they come with novelties.
Yes.
But being a scientist, like an author or painter, you cannot close them. I mean, you have to work even if the circumstances are complicated. So you can never ever stop a searching scientist. A careeristic scientist, maybe that they are interested in a career, but for those who are searching, it doesn't really matter, because you cannot control. You are only interested in trying to understand and to what is going on and to prove that. And and you can also open all the time for changes and seeing something new. Yeah.
That was beautifully put. One of the complexities about now looking into climate change for most of us is that once you've read the, quote, official book in Inconvenient Truth, which really opened the door to tying us all into these particular things that were going to happen, a lot of us who read the book internalized that information as total fact. And so now when we look back, as the other parts of the science float to the top, right?
Yep.
And we now start to bring introspection into this rather than blind faith, it's really disconcerting.
Yes.
It's very disconcerting.
I completely agree. That is
very difficult.
That's a tragic. And I was all the way worried about this. There are two things in it that one should be able to trust scientists. But this is meaning that you should have free scientists. There's a difference between free scientists or loyal scientists. And that's, I say, why did 33 people became the author in sea level, on the sea level chapter? None of them have had any prior work in sea level changes. They were put there because they were loyal, not because they knew sea level. And the same goes in many of the other chapters. So that's a major drawback for sure. But then the other thing, if we come, and we are in Sweden, we always talk about democracy. And democracy is really that everyone should be able to evaluate information. And then you can evaluate in different ways, but the information should be the true thing. And then you are able to judge it. But if this is not true, the information you get, all this is just falling apart. And that's really tragic. But that's, for me, which shouldn't be this dialectic between computer games and field observation. But if you have field observation, it's always, so to say, true. You cannot fiddle with the field data. You can interpret it differently. And that's okay, because this is, scientists can't do that. But it should, you should have training, you should have learn about it, you should know what you are looking for, and if everything looks good, you look even more to see if there is anything which you have done wrong. If you go find beautiful in one or two islands, make another 10 islands in order to be real sure. But this is a field evidence. But the other thing has destroyed it, yes. And those people like Al Gore has really destroyed science, yes. But those who subscribe with them, many scientists did the same. But they asked me at the meeting in London, do you think argument can change? I said, no, I don't think so. I think only the observational truth, when they can see that sea temperature is not going up any longer, sea is not rising, and so on, so on, then the glaciers are not melting. Finally, they catch up with the story, and then it falls apart. And that's where we are now. It starts to catch up with them. Reality starts to catch up, and then it falls apart. They also asked me in the beginning of the 2000, prepare, document what we are going to do in 2012 when the Kyoto Protocol is being renewed. I said, at that time we probably have realized it. So the ship is sinking, and the rats are starting to leave the sinking ship. So maybe we should take care of about them instead, in order to put them in the right place. So this was foreseen, but it was in some way. I was also in Copenhagen. We had an alternative meeting, very wonderful and exceptionally good. And even who I worked so much in it, it was disciplines. Yeah, I know that it was bad, but I had no idea that it was that bad. So you also continue to learning. But I was of course a little amused where Greenpeace or what it was have taken out a polar bear in ice and put it on the marketplace, and it was supposed to melt during the conference. But then it became so deadly cold, so it didn't melt. It was freezing instead. So then they took away the polar bear and dropped it in the sea or whatever they did.
Let me ask you this. How do your colleagues who specialize in the same thing that you do, what is their perspective? Is it the same as yours, similar as yours? Are you all upset because you see the same stuff?
Thank you it's a good question, because, that is one of the problems maybe. People are very clever, people understand very much. But in order to leave, so to say, your writings or your lecturing or whatever you are doing and go into the debate, it takes a lot of time, energy, efforts, and some people don't have either the skill, the courage, or the time. So they take the easiest way, they are silent. But we shouldn't have that. So the question you asked, how about my colleagues? So I think about 80 earlier, when I was president of the Commission on Silver Change and Coastal Evolution, I think it was I had no one disagreeing with it in our context. It was just, if any rise is so little that we don't need to bother about it. Now, because its funding has come into it, maybe a little more are interesting in that, but it's still a minority. The sea level community, I think surely 80% are not at all subscribing to IPCC.
How big is the sea level community internationally? Like how many people?
I think it's about 400 people actually working on it. We had in my commission, we had about, I think it was 400, but not to exaggerate, I says 300-400. But I'm pretty sure that it was 400. I have
wow.
I have it somewhere in the computer.
That's a very, very small, dedicated niche, isn't it?
It is, but on the other hand, they were devoted just to look at the sea.
Right, that's what I was saying, dedicated.
Dedicated.
Yes. So,
and how many of IPCC have to measure it? It's 2-3 persons which measure this computer. There's very, very few. So and of course, then they review it and they write the articles. But those who actually are telling it, those are fiddling with the tide gauge records, it's a handful. And they just rate different in different papers.
I have a question completely separate from any assertions the IPCC said or Al Gore or any of that, which is, On a separate level, if there is flooding anywhere in the world, how is flooding traditionally caused?
One thing, certainly there are floodings. I mean, the earth coasts are not stable. I mean, in Stockholm is going up with 0.5 meter per century, because that's the uplift memory from the Ice Age. If you go to Bangkok area, where they are subtracting both water and gas and so, and they are loading a lot of sediments in the delta, this causes subsidence, and you cannot do very much about it. You can start to fill the excavated water, for example. In part of Japan, Niigata area, for example, they have very, very strong subsidence of the area. But that is the land which is subsiding. It's just because they take out water, very much water, and there. And of course, then the sediment shrinks also. So this is a strong factor. But they are local phenomena, which you, so to say, cannot do anything about. And the local we have to take by on the low. Then there come this global tendency that we should be superimposed on this. This is a global tendency. We have Holland, the Netherlands. The Netherlands have been subsiding for 400 million years.
When you say subsiding, can you explain what you mean by that to those of us who...
is going down with respect to the Earth's center, we could say.
Okay.
So, and then if water is being constant, then of course the thing will be that the water is flooding over the land. But that's a subsidence. So, for example, we know that the Netherlands is subsiding with 0.4 millimeter per year. And if the figures of the sea level rise, which they are saying, would be correct, then Holland would be uplifted. And that's nonsense. I mean, it's not uplifted. It had always been subsiding. So how could they say that those figures are absurd? They don't conquer with what we know in reality. Place after place. We have Venice. Venice is a wonderful cultural place which we don't want to be flooded, but it's sitting on edge of a delta. So it's slowly subsiding, and we have a wonderful trend thanks to some camera obscura figures from 1740. We have a wonderful trend of the subsidence up to today. And any change in sea level there would be exaggerated. So we would pick it up so very simply and so clearly. And we don't see it. There is no sea level rise. And in 1970, it was even the opposite. It has little to do with engineering things, but there's at least no rise. So all this has to be taken together and compared. And if you have, for example, the satellite altimetry in French Guyana, it should rise by 3 millimeters per year, says the map. But they have a wonderful long record of 50 years. And we have the tidal cycles, perfectly symmetric, and they're zero. So you see, we have to go back to the wells, to the sources, and check them. And then sea level is not rising. And of course, I cannot help that I used to finish some lectures by saying the sea is not rising. That means that the main threat is gone. And you can also, as a joke, I did that in Academy of Science, Russian Academy of Science in 2005. The tiger has lost its teeth. And maybe it was not even a tiger, just
a kitty cat,
blown up balloon dummy. And that is what
maybe it was just a kitty cat.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I have a question about satellite telemetry. Who controls it? When you rely on satellite telemetry, who controls it?
Oh, that is both in France and in America, in NOAA. in Boulder. And they're doing a very good work. But first you have the satellite, and they're going around and around, and you measure the distance between the satellite and the sea surface. And then you can compute it and so, and you get a figure, and that has to be calibrated for atmospheric variations and so on. All those physical calibrations, when they have been done, there is, as far as when I do it, it's 0, rise. But then they add, without telling it, a calibration picture, which I call a personal calibration, so they get a trend. And that trend it gives then something which C is going up and down around. But much of that could, of course, be, as they said, expansion due to some heating. But when you check it, when you check the data in the Maldives, it doesn't work. When you check it in French Guyana, it doesn't fit. When you check it in the Mediterranean region, you don't fit. And there you can see the only factor which is make a large change in the altimetry. That is really precipitation and evaporation. You can see the water from the big rivers, Volga and Don, going into the Black Sea and rising sea level. And from that, it's going out to the East Mediterranean, flooding that area. So it had nothing to do with any global sea level effect. That's a local precipitation effect. So all these, but if you don't analyze it that way, you run into problems. And as soon as they get the trend, they are satisfied. I accused them at a meeting in the Russian Academy of Science that this is not measured. You have inferred that from outside. You shouldn't do that. And then one man stood up. We spoke fairly rapidly, so he fell out of thinking. So he stood up and he said, yes, but we had to do it. Otherwise we wouldn't have got a trend. So then I stopped it and said, did you hear what you just said? It was exactly that I'm accusing you for. And you see, that's the way of working. And scientists doesn't work like that. We have to be sure about it.
Are you sad about what's happening?
Yeah. I'm the largest sadness is because of the reputation of science. I'm trying to say we have to restore the scientific values, and this is a big thing. This is a real, so to say, sad thing. It's really remarkable also that so many people can be fooled. That makes a danger of. If you can fool them this way, I mean, the whole community could be fooled to anything. We know that from previous, when nations are in war, usually there are some central group which fool the other to take arms and run somewhere. But here it's scientists. It makes the whole society so fragile, and that makes me feel sad, yes. For the scientific part, I am also of course, when it's the fight, I'm a bit amused, I have to say, because I know what I'm talking about.
If you could do a few things, let's say you had the next year to educate the world about how the sea levels really work,
yeah,
what would you do?
Yeah, I think it would be nice to show those critical areas. Go there with a camera or something like that. I was interviewed in the Maldives, and there's a very nice Danish movie on this. Doomsday Called Off, it was called. But Bangladesh has very nice things to do. I would like to see Tuvalu by myself. I would like to see Vanuatu and all those famous places and check where it took off to in the wrong direction and try to explain it for them. Yep.
I think this would help a lot of people because the biggest scare, I would say, of this, I learned recently that climate change is always happening. It's a natural thing and it's cyclical. But most of us are now relating to climate change as if it's a problem when it's a natural cycle. So I think it would help a lot of people release their fears and their worries and their concerns. There's a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety now.
Yes.
And a lot of upset, and the climate has now been made to be the monster, and it's not.
Yep.
But it's related to that.
So right you are, but this personal basis, when I had my book and so many people bought it after a newspaper article in London, so many interesting stories was told in letters to me. How so very afraid they were, and that part I didn't know. So it's interesting to learn that. It's terrible, but I should take the opportunity and tell people: don't worry. Look at the coast. There are coasts which are in danger because of a long-term erosions. There people are putting houses where they shouldn't have put houses. But that's another thing. It has nothing to do with this global parameter which people have claimed that that's this war, and that worry we can lift off the shoulders of people. That was one other thing in my book. I free the world from the condemnation of becoming flooded.
I think that's really important, which is why I wanted to speak with you in this broadcast dialogue, because this is a great fear. I mean, as I'm listening to you, I have the imagery in my head of the Al Gore film. I literally see the models taking water higher and higher and higher all over the cities. That imagery is in my subconscious, and even as we speak about sea level rising, that whole thing is already imprinted in my consciousness.
Yeah.
And so when you have imagery that's imprinted in consciousness, right, the subconscious believes it if it looks official most of the time. That's the devilishness of what we have to face. It's kind of like with advertising. A lot of people don't even know they accept the advertising they see subconsciously.
Precisely. You pointed exactly one of the things I'm saying. Earlier, we could nearly accept the lies in advertising. We understood that and that shampoo, and so if they say that they're absolutely the world's best and it did that and that phenomenous effects on your hair, we know that it was exaggerations. But when this is being allowed, even in science, that is so sad, you know. And this is the part which really makes me both angry, sad, and so on, because this is the misuse and this even the destruction of science in some way. And there's so many academies of science which have given out statements, and they shouldn't have done that, because it's so loosely founded, but it's all like a snowball. It has started to roll, and all people jump into the bandwagon. But in this case, the bandwagon has collapsed, and now we should rethink and go out and look at the field. The bandwagon is there, and you have fallen off, and we are standing in God's scenery, and we have to look around and see the reality. And reality must come and make a new world. So the new world we have to put on observation, and computers should be there in order to guide us, but they should not lead us.
That's a great distinction.
Very great distinction.
Don't you think also that part of a willingness to look and rethink this whole matter is going to require a leap of faith, just to be willing to be receptive to rethinking the entire matter?
Either we should simply dismiss the IPCC of United Nations, or we should make new officers.
The complexity about that, the complexity.
The head, but all true. I mean, we should take specialists for each branch of the issue. And I mean, why should they all give the same result? I mean, of course, if this is true, this should be conflicting. One say, "Oh, here it's terrible," and the other say, "No, here is nothing to worry about." And see, disasters have always been on. And with this enormous increase in population and with the increase of megacities, like we have Haiti, we have the earthquake in Haiti. That is a terrible thing. So many people died. It is still going on. All these problems and disaster which is there. But it's one city, one mega city. Any day it may become another similar large disaster somewhere else in the world, because we have concentrated the vulnerability and the potential of disaster in the mega cities. And it goes for diseases, it goes for earthquakes, it goes for flooding, it goes for so many things. And that is how fragile, dangerous we have built our world. And we should address those, so to say, real threats. Those are real threats which we must cope with, or at least try to cope with. The other is what is going. I'm afraid it was a distraction. They took away the word's eyes from those more urgent things. But I'm not sure about it.
Talk about the solar minimum, if you could, for a few minutes. Explain it to the public. It's really been left away from the entire dialogue.
Okay, yes. And I tell you why. Because when IPCC started in 88, 89, it was purposely meant, it was launched partly from Sweden, and Bolin became our meteorologist became the first president. It was purposely said that the sun should not be considered, because this is a primarily meteorologic oceanographic project. You see? And so therefore, but of course the sun was. So in geology, and this is what I'm working with, and that I had a project on geomagnetism and climate, so we specifically addressed these questions. The sun has maxima and minima. Today we are at the end of a longer. I mean, we have the 11 years. 11-year cycles, but those two have a longer term cyclicity. Okay, so for example, in 1687 to 1703, we had nearly no sunspots, and it was a very, very low activity. And at the same time, we had a little ice age. 1440 to 1460 is the same, a solar minimum. 1809 to 1821, we had another solar minimum, a little bit shorter but quite deep. And this was when we had a war in Europe, and there was, of course, people were suffering tremendously much for that. And there is some sort of cycles on cycles, and if you play that game, you know that in about 2040, 2050, at around there, exactly, the time is not so easy, but it's quite clear that you will have another solar minimum. So if you look at the other solar minima, you say, what happened then? It was very, very cold in the northern hemisphere. The Arctic was nearly blocked. And what is this? Because nowadays they are talking about the Arctic will be ice-free. You hear these completely different stories. And the polar water, the Arctic water, went down into the North Sea, and from the North Sea down to central Portugal. So but at the same time, in Gibraltar and Morocco, it was exceptionally warm, because the southern branch of the Gulf Stream had increased, whilst the northern branch had decreased. So that is also a function of I think, about Earth's rate of rotation, because when you have weak solar activity. It is two things which happen. It affects the energy which is going out, but also the magnetic wind, so-called solar wind. And the solar wind interacts with the Earth magnetic field. So if it's weak, we have a lot of particles, cosmic ray falling in, and we have a Danish one say that affects the cloud formation, so that's why it becomes cloud. For me, I say, no, it also affects the Earth rate of rotation. And if it's spinning up, more things are concentrating in the equatorial band, and the cold water from the north is being pulled down, so it gets little ice ages. It's just out in magazine, this paper of mine, Global and Planetary Change, which is a fine paper. So I worked a lot on that. But this is a long-term changes. So we will be on this cyclic change on the sun. For sure, we will be soon in a solar minimum. Then you can say, how will it end up? If you believe in global warming, then it may cancel it out or weaken that, but at least it has to interact with it, whatever you think. So this is out of the IPCC. They don't even think of it. They don't even say anything about it. And those people make economical calculations. They, like Stern report, they have fantastic views of the new trading from Europe across the Arctic into through Bering Strait down to China and Japan, canceling out the Panama. But this is not what the Earth variable says. So yes, that is a major problem. So another thing, when I now talk about Earth rotation, because this is maybe the simplest and best way of measuring the global effect of sea level. We have the World Championship, we have the Olympic Games in Washington, Vancouver, and
Canada.
The figure skaters, when they are spinning very rapidly, they hold their hands close to the body. But when they are slowing down, they delicately put out their arms in order to change rotational momentum, it's called in physics. And the same with the Earth. If the sea is increasing the radius of the Earth by rising, then Earth has to slow down. And it did so when sea level rose 10 centimeters between 1850 and 1940. It rose 10 centimeters. And that's about the variability we have. So it's 10 centimeters, up and down. But now we have very fine record, and there is no such tendency of slowing down. On the contrary, Earth is speeding up. So that's the other way which I work when I'm evaluating and judging all those phenomena. But what I have to do, they shouldn't just sit with blank eyes looking into your computer and making one line through a sinusoidal or at least changing curve and say this is the trend to come, because it's not the trend to come.
It is amazing to me that the people that we count on to give us the correct input, have made sure that the sun's relationship to the Earth is completely left out of the equation of analysis.
Yeah.
And
we discussed that. You had a very good scientist, Eddie. He was one of the first who saw that solar minima is also cold periods. And I was in the same, we were together fighting with IPCC when they started. At that time it was called Project on Global Change. And we said, you must include the sun No, they said, no, we will take it out because we want to measure only the meteorological oceanographic effects on Earth itself. But so it went wrong.
It's amazing that could be because of the sun's influence on the Earth, even the tides, even the oceans. How could the sun not have anything to do with it? It's bizarre. What's next for you this next year? What do you hope to accomplish? I know that you stated that you wanted to go to these places.
I'm going to Chicago with a meeting and talking about this.
Okay, so you're going to go to Chicago. How can people get in touch with you? Do you have a website or do you have an email or how?
Email I have.
Okay, why don't you give out your email?
I can do that. Mörner as my name without two dots, and and then POJ.NU.
Okay. Mörner at POJ.NU?
Yes.
And we'll also have something for you on the website. Is there anything else you wanted to share with audiences today?
No, I think we have covered quite a lot, and I hope people will, in their heart, and their mind, not be so much afraid of the global component. Look at the local, because local is local, but the global component, you can forget about that. And also we should be worried, really worried, about the attitude of people fooling us. I am both amazed and shocked about it, and we should do that. But for the fear they wanted to put into us, that's not correct. So we should have a fear about those people who fooled us, not about the issue they are talking about.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking with Nils-Axel Mörner, who is a physicist and leader of the Maldives Sea Level Project, a former president of the INQUA Commission on Sea Level Changes and Coastal Evolution, formerly head of paleophysics and geodynamics at Stockholm University. He's the author of a new book. State your new book.
Yeah, The Greatest Lie Ever Told.
We thank you for educating us about the sea level changes, putting it in perspective for us. We thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for listening.